Arthur wanted was to put 30 rounds through paper and let the arthritis in his hands ache in peace amid the familiar stench of burnt powder, stale coffee, and cheap industrial floor wax. His quiet moment at the indoor range ended, however, when a kid in a synthetic jersey pointed at his rusted .38 and sneered, "That's just a toy, Grandpa." The heavy, soundproofed doors of the Oak Creek Shooting Club always felt like they weighed a ton. Arthur pushed through them with his left shoulder, sparing his right. His right shoulder had a piece of shrapnel sitting against the bursa sack, a souvenir from a humid jungle 50 years ago that flared up every time it rained. Today, the sky over the city was the color of a bruised knee, and Arthur's joints were screaming. He didn't come to the range for fun anymore. He came because of an old, stubborn obligation to the machine. A gun was a tool, and a tool left to sit would rust, just like a man. He shuffled down the concrete walkway behind the firing line, his worn leather boots scuffing the floor. The air filtration system hummed a constant, low-frequency vibration that rattled in the fillings of his teeth. He found lane 4, his usual spot. It was tucked near the back wall, slightly dimmer than the rest of the bays, illuminated by a flickering fluorescent tube that cast a sickly, yellow pallor over the wooden shooting bench. Arthur set down his canvas duffel. The canvas was faded olive drab, fraying at the seams, smelling faintly of mildew and Hoppe's No. 9 solvent. He unzipped it slowly. His knuckles were swollen, the skin thin and spotted like old parchment. From the bag, he pulled out a rolled-up square of felt. He laid it flat on the bench and placed his revolver on it. It was a Colt Official Police, chambered in .38 Special. It wasn't pretty. The blued finish had long since worn away at the muzzle and along the edges of the cylinder, exposing dull gray steel. The walnut grips were darkened by decades of sweat and oil, smoothed down so perfectly they looked melted. It had no optical sights, no underbarrel rail, no ergonomic stippling, just a heavy barrel, a fixed front blade sight, and a double-action trigger that felt like dragging a cinder block across a velvet rug until it suddenly, cleanly broke. Arthur adjusted his electronic earmuffs. They were cheap, the foam padding cracked. As he turned them on, the ambient noise of the range rushed into his ears with a tinny, artificial hiss. Then, Lane 5 opened up. It wasn't just a person arriving. It was an event. A younger man, maybe 25, 30, tops, strode into the adjacent bay. He was wearing a tight, moisture-wicking jersey, plastered with the logos of ammunition brands and tactical gear companies. His name, Trent, was printed across his shoulder blades in aggressive, blocky lettering. He was trailed by another kid holding a smartphone mounted to a stabilizer gimbal. "All right, we're hot," Trent said, his voice loud enough to clip the microphones in Arthur's cheap earmuffs. "Gonna run the Bill drill today. Looking to shave my split times down to a .15. Let's get the camera set up on the brass deflector." Arthur kept his eyes down. He methodically opened a cardboard box of 158 grain lead round nose ammunition. The brass casings were cold against his fingertips. Trent dropped a massive, hard-shell Pelican case onto his bench. He popped the heavy latches with sharp, cracking sounds. When he opened it, Arthur caught a glimpse of the weapon inside. It looked more like a power tool than a firearm. It was a customized 2011 pistol bright metallic red frame, aggressive grip tape that looked like crushed glass, an extended magazine well flaring out the bottom, and a holographic red dot optic mounted to the slide. Trent racked the slide. The Madelon metal sound was tight, slick, expensive. He slammed a 30-round extended magazine into the well with a hollow thwack. "Camera rolling?" Trent asked his buddy. "Rolling," the friend said, adjusting his stance behind the glass partition. Arthur's fingers betrayed him. As he reached to pull a cartridge from his cardboard box, his index finger cramped. The heavy, 38 round slipped from his grasp, hit the concrete floor with a sharp ping, and rolled slowly under the partition into lane 5. Arthur closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He let out a breath through his nose. He hated this. He hated the frailty of his own body. He bent down, his knees popping audibly, a sharp spike of pain shooting up his lower back. He reached under the partition, his trembling, spotted hand grasping blindly for the brass casing. A stylized tactical boot stepped near his hand. Arthur looked up. Trent was staring down at him, a smirk playing on his lips. Trent reached down, picked up the round, and held it out. "Here you go, Chief," Trent said. His tone wasn't openly hostile, which somehow made it worse. It was dripping with condescending pity. Arthur took the round. "Appreciate it," he muttered, his voice raspy, thick with morning phlegm. He stood up slowly, using the bench to brace himself. Trent's eyes drifted from Arthur to the Colt, resting on the faded felt pad. The smirk widened, showing perfectly white teeth. He scoffed, looking back at his friend with the camera. "Careful with the antique, Grandpa," Trent said, chuckling. He tapped the heavy tungsten barrel of his own race gun. "Don't want that toy blowing up in your hands. You sure they even make bullets for that thing anymore?" Arthur stood there. The heavy round was cold in his palm. A younger man might have snapped back. A younger man might have puffed out his chest and challenged him. But Arthur didn't feel heroic. He just felt an ugly, heavy exhaustion mixed with a sudden spike of pathetic embarrassment. He felt small. He hated the kid for making him feel it, and he hated himself for letting it happen. He didn't offer a witty retort. He didn't lock eyes with Trent in a display of silent, grizzled menace. He simply turned away, his throat tight, and placed the cartridge back into the cardboard box. Trent laughed aloud, a dismissive sound, and turned back to his lane. "All right, let's run it. Timer ready." The electronic timer beeped a piercing, high-pitched squeal. Trent exploded into motion. Crack, 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 crack. The noise was deafening. A rapid staccato burst of pressure that punched Arthur in the chest. Trent's custom pistol spat fire, and empty brass in a relentless blur. The casings ejected in a neat, violent arc, bouncing off the plastic partition between their lanes. One piece of hot brass deflected over the top, landing on Arthur's forearm. It burned for a second before Arthur brushed it off. Trent hit the button to retrieve his target. The motorized track whined, pulling the paper silhouette back from 7 yards away. Trent and his cameraman leaned in. "Look at that," Trent said, pointing to a ragged hole punched directly through the center of the paper target's chest. 15 rounds, 2.4 seconds. The recoil impulse on this comp is insane. The dot literally does not move. "Sick, bro. Got it all on 4K, his buddy said, panning the phone. Arthur watched them from the corner of his eye. Trent was undeniably fast. His grip was textbook, his stance aggressive. He was a product of modern kinematics and endless repetition. He was a supreme athlete in a sport designed to mimic violence. But it was just a sport. Arthur picked up the Colt. It felt heavy today. The steel was cold, sucking the heat from his stiff joints. He pushed the cylinder release latch. The cylinder swung out with a heavy, oiled glide. He didn't use a speed loader. He didn't have one. He picked up the rounds from the box, one by one. Slide. The brass casing slipped into the first chamber. Slide. The second. He rotated the cylinder with his thumb, listening to the tiny, intricate clicks of the hand engaging the ratchet. As he loaded, Arthur's mind drifted, unbidden, away from the sterile smell of the indoor range. He didn't have flashbacks like they showed in the movies, no cinematic explosions or dramatic music. He just remembered textures, the texture of mud drying on the grip of this exact revolver, the smell of copper blood and wet canvas, the frantic, terrifying realization that a human life, his or someone else's, was going to be decided by the crude alignment of iron sights in the dark. For Trent, pulling a trigger was an act of creation, creating a score, creating a video, creating a brand. For Arthur, pulling a trigger had always been an act of deletion. It was a terrible, intimate arithmetic. He slid the sixth round into the cylinder. He snapped it shut with a flick of his wrist. The clack of the steel locking into the frame was deep and final. Trent was resetting his gear, talking loudly about trigger reset weights. Arthur stepped up to the line. He reached up to the overhead control box for his target. Trent had been shooting at 7 yards. Arthur pushed the toggle switch forward and held it. The motorized pulley began to hum. The target, a standard, blank sheet of heavy white paper with a single 1-inch black square printed in the dead center, sailed down the lane. It passed the 7-yard line. It passed the 15-yard line. Next door, Trent stopped talking. He looked over. The paper kept going until it hit the backstop, 25 yards, the maximum distance of the indoor range. At 25 yards, a 1-inch black square looks like a speck of dust. Arthur didn't look at Trent. He squared his shoulders to the target. He didn't adopt Trent's hyper-aggressive, crouched stance. He simply stood up straight. He raised the revolver, wrapping both hands around the smooth walnut grips. His left thumb crossed over his right. His hands were shaking. A fine, high-frequency tremor that made the front sight blade dance in the rear notch. Breathe, Arthur told himself. Bone support. Let the skeleton do the work. He exhaled slowly. As the air left his lungs, his body settled. The tremor didn't stop entirely, but it slowed, becoming a predictable rhythm. He didn't cock the hammer back. He was shooting double action. Arthur's trigger finger tightened. He began the long, heavy pull. This was where the muscle memory took over. It wasn't about yanking the gun to make it fire. It was about steadily increasing the pressure until the weapon decided to fire itself. The cylinder rotated. The hammer rose, millimeter by millimeter. Next door, Trent was silent. He was watching. Arthur stared at the front sight. He didn't look at the target. He looked only at the serrated black steel of the blade, keeping it perfectly level within the rear notch. The speck of dust, 25 yards away, sat exactly on top of it. The trigger reached the wall. Bang. The sound of the .38 was entirely different from Trent's 9mm. It wasn't a sharp, snapping crack. It was a deep, concussive boom that seemed to roll through the floorboards. A gout of yellow flame erupted from the muzzle, illuminating the dark lane. The heavy recoil pushed back into Arthur's aching wrist, lifting the gun in a smooth, vertical arc. Arthur didn't pull the gun back down. He rode the recoil, letting the muzzle fall naturally back onto the target. As soon as the sights aligned, his finger was already moving. Bang, the second shot. Just as deliberate, but faster than Trent expected, an old man to move. Arthur wasn't thinking about the camera. He wasn't thinking about split times. His mind was entirely empty, reduced to the mechanical relationship between pressure, alignment, and explosion. Bang. 6 shots. 6 heavy, rolling booms that echoed off the acoustic foam. Arthur lowered the weapon. He kept the muzzle pointed downrange. His breathing was a little heavier now, and a bead of sweat was working its way down his wrinkled neck. The air in his bay was thick with acrid white smoke. He reached up with a trembling hand and hit the retrieval button. The mechanical whine of the pulley kicked in. The blank white paper began its long journey, back from the 25-yard line. Trent was leaning over the partition, his customized race gun dangling forgotten in his hand. His cameraman friend had lowered the phone. The target slid into the bright light of lane 4 and stopped, swinging gently on the cardboard backing. Arthur broke the cylinder open. He pushed the ejector rod. 6 smoking brass casings fell onto the wooden bench with a series of sharp clatters. He didn't look at the target right away. He was busy wiping the soot off the face of the cylinder with a rag. Trent looked. There was the 1-inch black square in the center of the white paper. Right in the middle of that black square, there was a hole. It wasn't a single bullet hole. It was a ragged, jagged opening, slightly larger than a quarter, where the paper had been chewed away by lead. All 6 rounds had passed through the exact same cluster, at 25 yards, with a double-action trigger pull. Trent swallowed. The sound was audible, even over the humming ventilation system. Arthur finally looked up. He glanced at the paper, gave a slow, microscopic nod of approval to himself, and then looked over at Trent. Arthur didn't smile. He didn't sneer. His eyes were just deeply, profoundly tired. "You're fast, son," Arthur said, his voice quiet, lacking any trace of malice. "But out in the dirt, fast just means you run out of bullets before you figure out what you're trying to hit." He turned back to his bench, picked up a speed loader he had hidden under his rag, and began to ready his next 6 rounds. The heavy silence hung in lane 5, thicker than the gun smoke. The heavy silence in lane 5 didn't last. It was quickly replaced by the awkward, shuffling sounds of deflated ego. Trent stared at the ragged hole in Arthur's target. He blinked, the muscles in his jaw working as he ground his teeth. He looked down at his custom 2011 pistol. The metallic red finish, which had looked so aggressive and cutting-edge 10 minutes ago, suddenly just looked loud, like a child's plastic toy left out in the sun. His cameraman friend, who had been hovering by the glass partition, slowly lowered his phone. "Hey man," he muttered, his voice barely carrying over the ventilation fans. "You want me to keep rolling?" "No," Trent snapped. It was too sharp. He caught himself, cleared his throat, and tried to reconstruct the careless facade. "No, cut it. Lighting's trash in here anyway." Trent stepped back up to his firing line. He punched the button for his own target. He held it down, watching the paper silhouette slide backward. He let it go all the way to the backstop. 25 yards. Arthur didn't watch him. He was already paying the price for his little display of pride. Underneath the bench, out of sight, Arthur's right hand was curled into a tight, trembling claw. The heavy double-action pull of the Colt, combined with the concussive recoil of 6 .38 special rounds, had sent a shockwave of inflammation straight into the arthritic joints of his knuckles and up his wrist. It felt like someone had driven a hot nail into the base of his thumb. Stupid, Arthur thought. Pride is a young man's poison. You're too old to be drinking it. He had come here to put 30 rounds through the paper, just to keep the rust off the machine. He had only fired 6, but those 6 had cost him entirely. His shoulder throbbed in time with his elevated heart rate. The adrenaline spike, that old, familiar, metallic taste in the back of his throat, was already crashing, leaving him hollowed out and exhausted. Next door, Trent raised his pistol. Arthur could hear the difference in the boy's breathing. Before, Trent had been breathing like a sprinter-sharp, rhythmic intakes of air. Now, He was holding his breath. He was trying to force the gun to be still. Crack, 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 crack. 5 shots. Slower than his previous blistering pace, but still fast. Trent was trying to prove something. He was trying to prove that his technology, his optics, and his compensator could outshoot an old man's iron sights and shaking hands. Trent hit the retrieval button immediately. The target zipped back down the lane. Arthur slowly wiped the cylinder of his revolver with a yellow silicone cloth, focusing on the oily smell of the fabric. But peripheral vision, it patio dies, is a stubborn thing. He saw Trent's target. It wasn't a 1-inch jagged hole. The 5 hits were scattered across the chest of the silhouette in a loose 8-inch pattern. 2 of the shots had drifted into the white paper outside the scoring rings. At 25 yards, a microscopic twitch of the wrist translated into feet of missed distance downrange. Trent's red dot sight was zeroed perfectly, but his trigger press yanked in a desperate attempt to be both fast and accurate had betrayed him. Trent stared at the paper. He didn't say anything. He didn't boast about split times or recoil impulses. He quietly unseated his magazine, cleared the chamber, and placed the red pistol back into its hard-shell pelican case. Arthur finished wiping down the Colt. He felt no triumph. Tearing down a kid's confidence didn't fix the shrapnel in his shoulder, and it didn't make the ghosts in his head any quieter. It just made the room feel smaller. He didn't load the next 6 rounds. Instead, he wrapped the revolver back in its faded felt square. He placed it carefully into the bottom of the olive-drab canvas duffel. He swept his 6 empty brass casings into his cupped hand, tossing them into the range's recycling bucket with a dull clatter. He zipped the bag shut. The metal zipper teeth caught halfway, and he had to yank it, his swollen knuckles protesting. As Arthur picked up his bag and turned to leave, he glanced at lane 5. Trent was just standing there, hands resting on the wooden bench, staring down at his expensive, useless target. The cameraman was awkwardly scrolling through his phone, pretending to be busy. Arthur pushed his ear protection up off his ears. The unfiltered noise of the range muffled pops from distant lanes. The drone of the fans flooded back in. He slung the canvas strap over his left shoulder and started the slow walk back up the concrete aisle. He just wanted to go home. He wanted to sit in his worn leather recliner, pour 2 fingers of cheap bourbon over a single ice cube, and wait for his hands to stop hurting. The heavy glass doors of the Oak Creek Shooting Club slid open, releasing Arthur into the brutal glare of the afternoon sun. The air outside was thick, smelling of hot asphalt and the faint exhaust of the nearby interstate. Arthur squinted, pulling a pair of scratched aviator sunglasses from his shirt pocket. He walked toward his car, a pale blue 1998 Buick Century that sat heavy on its suspension. The hood was pockmarked with hail dents, and the clear coat was peeling like a bad sunburn. He unlocked the trunk with a physical key, the mechanism grinding slightly, and dropped his canvas bag inside. "Hey, hold up." The voice was tight, reluctant. Arthur closed the trunk. He didn't slam it. He just leaned his weight on the lid until the latch clicked. He turned around. Trent was standing a few yards away. The aggressive swagger from the indoor range was gone. In the harsh sunlight, without the flattering shadows of the firing line and the framing of a camera lens, he just looked like a young man in an overpriced, sweaty jersey. His hands were shoved deep into the pockets of his tactical trousers. Arthur leaned against the warm metal of his car. He didn't speak. He just waited. "Look," Trent started, his eyes darting to the cracked pavement before meeting Arthur's. I run 3,000 rounds a month. I take classes from guys who used to be in Tier 1 units. I dry fire every night in my living room." He gestured vaguely back toward the concrete building. "That group you shot. with a heavy-ass double-action trigger. That shouldn't be physically possible. Physics doesn't care about what you think is possible, Arthur said. His voice was gravelly, dry. Physics just cares about alignment. Trent shook his head. Don't give me the Mr. Miyagi crap. I'm asking a real question. How did you do that? You were shaking. I saw your hands. You were shaking like a leaf. Arthur looked at the kid. He saw the genuine frustration in Trent's eyes. It was the frustration of someone who had bought all the right gear, memorized all the right acronyms, and still found out the hard way that there was a ghost in the machine he couldn't purchase. Arthur sighed. The humid air felt heavy in his lungs. You're right, Arthur said quietly. I was shaking. He pulled his right hand out of his jacket pocket and held it up between them. Even now, resting in the open air, a fine tremor ran through his fingers. Arthritis, Arthur said. Nerve damage, age. Take your pick. He lowered his hand. You shoot to stop the timer. You're trying to beat a clock, so you tense up. You grip that pistol like you're trying to strangle it, and you rip the trigger back. Trent frowned. Grip pressure is fundamental to recoil management. On a flat range, Arthur corrected. When you're trying to go fast. Arthur turned, looking past Trent at the flat, featureless horizon of the strip mall across the street. You asked how I shoot like that when my hands shake. I learned a long time ago that you can't fight the shake. You can't muscle the gun into stillness. You just have to let it happen. He looked back at Trent. The kid was actually listening now. No cameras, no audience. When you're scared, Arthur continued, his voice dropping a fraction of a decibel. He wasn't talking about the abstract concept of fear. He was talking about a very specific, deeply buried memory. The smell of wet earth, the deafening roar of rotor blades, the utter, paralyzing certainty that he was about to die. When you are truly, profoundly terrified, your body betrays you. Your heart rate hits 200. You lose your fine motor skills. Your hands will shake worse than mine do right now. If your entire foundation is built on perfect grip pressure and a 2-pound trigger reset, you're going to miss. Trent swallowed. The Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. That old Colt, Arthur said, nodding toward the trunk of the Buick. It's not a toy. It's a heavy, ugly, unforgiving piece of iron. The trigger pull is 12 pounds. You can't jerk it. If you try to go fast, you'll throw the shot 3 feet to the left. Arthur stepped closer to Trent. He didn't try to look intimidating. He just looked incredibly old. You don't pull that trigger, son, Arthur said. You roll it. You accept the shake. You watch that front sight dance around the target, and you just keep building pressure on the trigger, slow and steady. You don't try to predict when it's going to go off. You just keep the blade in the notch. When the gun finally fires, it should surprise you. Trent stood there, processing it. He was a creature of the digital age, a kid who relied on instantaneous feedback and split-second metrics. That's too slow, Trent argued, though there was no heat in his voice. In a real gunfight, speed is everything. You have to put rounds on the threat. Arthur let out a dry, humorless chuckle. It sounded like sandpaper on wood. There's an old saying, kid. Fast is fine, but accuracy is final. Arthur turned away, walking to the driver's side door of his car. You were throwing a wall of lead at a piece of paper today, but paper doesn't shoot back. When someone is trying to kill you, you don't need a .15 split time. You just need one bullet placed exactly where it needs to go, while your entire nervous system is screaming at you to run away. Arthur opened the heavy steel door of the Buick. The hinges groaned loudly. "You've got good reflexes," Arthur said over his shoulder. He didn't look back at Trent. He looked at the cracked leather of his driver's seat. "You're an athlete. Keep making your videos. Keep having fun, but don't confuse a game with the real thing. It's an ugly, dirty business. Pray you never have to find out how ugly it is." Arthur lowered himself into the driver's seat. His back popped. His shoulder screamed a dull, throbbing warning. He pulled the door shut with a heavy, metallic thud that echoed across the empty parking lot. He put the key in the ignition. The old V6 engine coughed twice before turning over, settling into a ragged, uneven idle. Through the dusty driver's side window, Arthur watched Trent. The younger man hadn't moved. He was just standing there on the hot asphalt, looking at the spot where Arthur had been leaning against the trunk. Trent slowly reached down and tapped the side of his leg, right where his expensive, custom pistol would normally sit in its competition holster. Arthur shifted the Buick into drive. He didn't wave. He didn't offer a nod of mutual respect. He just pulled out of the parking space, the old suspension squeaking in protest, and drove toward the exit. The air conditioning in the Buick was broken. It only blew warm, stale air, smelling faintly of old cigarette smoke and dust. Arthur rolled the window down an inch. The wind caught the gray hair at his temples. His right hand throbbed relentlessly on the steering wheel. He glanced down at his swollen knuckles. The pain was real. It was a physical reminder of a past he couldn't outrun and a present he couldn't change. He didn't feel like a hero who had just taught a cocky kid a lesson. He just felt tired. Arthur flexed his fingers against the worn plastic of the steering wheel, wincing at the flare of pain in his joints. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, navigating the heavy traffic of the city, leaving the echoes of the shooting range far behind him. The old machine rolled on, carrying another day's weight until the next time he had to pull it out of the dark.